Hello and welcome to the Freight FA Brief. In this show, we like to break down the moves that actually matter in freight, logistics, and supply chains. Today, we're focusing on UPS. They just launched a $48 million bet on cold chain infrastructure. And we want to talk about what it really signals for the future of premium freight. This isn't just another CapEx investment. I think it's a window into how large networks are rewriting the profit map of global logistics. Now, if you're listening to this podcast, you need to know that this one has a direct implication for where you might want to position your network, or how you price complexity, and how you think about healthcare as a freight category. So let's start at the beginning and set the stage. UPS has announced a $48 million investment to build 27 temperature-controlled freight cross-dock facilities across its network. Now, it's important to know that these aren't just in the Americas. They span Europe and Asia as well. Now, these aren't your typical generic warehouses. They're cross-docks engineered for speed and short-term storage between air and ground while holding product within tight temperature bands. Think of 2 to 8 degrees or 15 to 25 degrees. Now, UPS is very explicit about why they're making this investment. It's because they have a strategy aimed at pharmaceuticals and biologics, and that includes GLP-1 weight loss and diabetes drugs. These types of drugs require strict refrigeration and zero tolerance for temperature excursions. Now, these new facilities are IATA pharma certified, and they're monitored 24/7, 365. And that's really meant to tighten the chain of custody for medicines where a single failure can wipe out the value of an entire pallet. You should also layer that on top of UPS's financial backdrop. If we rewind back to Q1 of 2026, UPS generated the first ever $3 billion healthcare revenue quarter, and healthcare represented more than 14% of consolidated revenue. Management has been clear on this. They are deliberately leaning into premium segments like SMB, B2B, and complex healthcare. And this is all happening while the broader revenue line has been under pressure. So if you zoom out, this $48 million is not what you would call a side project. It's actually part of this multifaceted, multi-year pivot to become the world's most capable, complex healthcare logistics provider. And it's also to anchor more of the company's earnings in freight that is high stakes, high spec, and high margin. I think what we are watching is a visible split in diversification of freight markets. On one side, you have commodity freight, and these are things like your general parcels, low yield e-com, de minimis imports. These transports are infinitely substitutable. The game there really is density, automation, and relentless cost pressure. But on the other side, you have premium freight, like cell and gene therapies, mRNA platforms, GLP-1 injectables, and other advanced medicines that UPS explicitly calls out. These moves are time critical, regulated, and they are truly unforgiving. Temperature excursions alone are estimated to cost the cold chain up to tens of billions of dollars annually. And the World Health Organization has said cold chain failures help drive as much as 50% global vaccine waste. So it's very clear here that UPS is choosing its side. By pouring more money into certified cold chain crossdocks, the company is effectively saying, we will own the hardest, most operationally demanding lanes because that's where true pricing power lives. These 27 facilities are not about adding generic capacity. They are about making sure that the weakest link in a GLP-1 or biologics lane is not the handoff between truck and aircraft. And I think that's a wake-up call for the rest of the industry, because if you're a carrier or a forwarder and you're still treating healthcare and other sensitive cargo as just another vertical, you're honestly misreading the direction of travel. Premium freight is becoming its own ecosystem with its own infrastructure and its own certifications. In fact, it has its own economics. The line haul is just one piece. The cross-dock, the monitoring, the data, the documented chain of custody, that's where the competitive moat is being dug. Let's look at this geographically across the US, Europe, Asia, and the broader Americas. That's really not random. It maps directly where advanced manufacturing, clinical trial activity, and specialty pharma are growing. As UPS's own earnings commentary notes have stated, The company has been speeding up its ground network in Europe and expanding operations in places like South Korea and Taiwan, specifically to support the manufacturing, high tech, and healthcare trade. So when you look at trade lanes in 27 or even 2028, you're going to see more separation between networks that can truly support this kind of cargo end to end and those that can't. So let's take a quick break to talk about Freight FA, because if you're still listening, you're exactly who this next part is for. This episode is brought to you by Freight FA, the freight intelligence layer built for people who actually live inside of these decisions every day. If you've been handed a new lane, and let's say it's temperature controlled from a manufacturing site within the US, you know what kind of headaches that may cause because you're really trying to map viable routing and handoff points. You're under pressure to quote something defensible and fast, but realistic. And you need to understand how all of this fits into your existing network without blowing up your margins. That's where Freight Flow Advisor inside of Freight FA comes in. Freight Flow Advisor is a chat-based AI tool that lets you walk through flows in plain language. You can ask it simple questions, and it responds with structured routing ideas, mode mixes, and risk notes you can actually use in a pricing meeting or a customer conversation. On top of that, Freight FA gives you scenario-aware pricing support, so you can really see how different routings, dwell assumptions, or service levels affect your cost picture before you lock in your quote. It will also give you network-aware insights, helping you understand where you own nodes and partners create an advantage and where you're exposed. And a chat workflow that, quite frankly, speaks freight, not generic AI buzzwords. So if you're trying to navigate the kind of premium freight split we're talking about in this episode, tools like Freight Flow Advisor are how you stay ahead of the game. So head on over and explore freightfa.com when you're ready to level up your freight intelligence stack. All right, as we pivot back to UPS and cold chain, let's talk brass tacks. What does this move mean if you're operating in the real world? For air cargo and integrators, this is a clear signal that belly space and freighters serving pharma-heavy hubs will continue to command a premium, especially when paired with certified cold chain handling on both ends. The cross docks are literally being optimized for fast air ground transfer. If your belly capacity or your freighter portfolio is tied into those nodes, you're suddenly part of a much more valuable corridor than a generic e-com lane. For trucking and drayage providers, the message is this: the first mile and last mile in healthcare are going to be less about do you have the truck and more about can you consistently hit this temperature window and this transfer standard. If UPS is upgrading the node, it will expect its ground partners to match the node's reliability. That means reefer quality, training, SOPs, and data sharing are all going to matter more for who gets those tenders. For brokers and forwarders, the value shifts from spot heroics to system design. Your ability to sit with the shipper, understand their therapy pipeline or their GLP-1 footprint, and then design routings that touch the right cross docks, the right gateways, and the right partners, that's how you turn this trend into margin, not just volume. In other words, your product is your routing brain plus your network map. The UPS announcement just made that more obvious. Now let's just jump into some financial notes real quick. First, UPS reaffirmed full year guidance of roughly $89.7 billion in revenue and around 9.6% adjusted operating margin, even as overall revenue is basically flat year on year. That tells you they believe premium segments like healthcare can help carry margin while the rest of the book gets a little more efficient. Second, this is not happening in isolation. UPS has been bolstering healthcare capabilities through acquisitions in Europe and expanding networks in Asia that explicitly target healthcare flows. The $48 million in cold chain crossdocks is best read as connecting the dots between those moves, turning a set of assets into a more coherent global healthcare platform. So if you're sitting in a strategy seat at another large carrier, the real question is, what's your equivalent of this? Where are you over-indexing on capability that actually changes your margin and structure, not just chasing volume to keep the network full? Now, there's one last layer that I would like to add to this, and it deserves some attention. As more chronic disease treatments and advanced therapies are rolled out beyond North America and Western Europe, the cold chain becomes both more fragile and more important. Infrastructure quality, power, reliability, and regulatory enforcement all vary, but patients' expectations for continuity of therapy do not. By placing certified monitored cross docks facilities across multiple regions, UPS is effectively building a backbone where it can plug in emerging market flows as they mature. It might start with high traffic corridors, but once the backbone exists, it becomes a platform for extending reliable healthcare logistics deeper into new markets. So, as we land this, UPS's $48 million in cold chain cross docks is not a random upgrade. It's a statement about where the company thinks the next decade of profitable freight is going to come from: high consequence cargo, high spec infrastructure, and high visibility networks. Listen, whether you're running a fleet, a brokerage, a forwarding operation, or you sit in a strategy chair, the practical questions coming out of this are: where do you want to sit on the spectrum between commodity and premium freight? What specific capabilities are you willing to invest in to justify better margins? And how are you going to understand your own flows well enough to price that complexity intelligently instead of guessing? That's the common thread between this UPS move, the broader healthcare logistics build out, and the work we're doing around freight intelligence at Freight FA. The industry is moving into a world where knowing your flows, your cost, and your exposure at a granular level is no longer optional, especially if you want to play in the premium tiers of freight. So listen, if you want to go deeper on this, we've published an in-depth article on substack.com at the Freight FA Brief. While you're there, make sure you hit that subscribe button because we unpack stories like this every week. And make sure to explore at freightfa.com to see how tools like Freight Flow Advisor can give you a clearer view of your own network. Also, make sure you check out our podcast on Spotify and Apple, and you can watch us on YouTube. If you're on social media, you can find us on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn at the Freight Flow Advisor. Until next time, this has been your Freight Flow Advisor Brief.